Welcome to the Profile Corner. In today's video, I thought I would take a moment to talk a little bit about woodworking clamps, the different types that you can buy, and the different types that you might need for various projects. I've bought quite a few different styles of clamps over the years, and I found that some are more effective than others at different types of projects. So I thought I would go through my collection of clamps here and show you some examples of what types of clamps you can buy at various stores. It's been said many times that a woodworker can never have too many clamps. You might easily go broke trying to buy every clamp that you may ever need, so it's best to buy clamps only as you need them for particular projects. Or if those clamps that you think that you might need in 5 months or so may be going on sale, then it may be wise to invest early in the clamps that you think that you might need. Okay, so we'll start out with some of the most simple types of clamps, and those would be bar clamps. In this box I have 4 packages of 3/4 inch pipe clamps that were made by Pony. These were purchased back when Pony was still a US company, and so these are made in the United States. You'll be able to find pipe clamps manufactured by various other companies, including Bessie. There's also a number of knockoff brands that you'd probably find at Harbor Freight and on Amazon. These pipe clamps are 3/4 inch pipe clamps, which means that they take a 3/4 inch diameter pipe, just like this one that you see here. You can also find pipe clamps that'll work with 1/2 inch diameter pipes, but those are much less rigid than our 3/4 inch thick pipes. And you'll commonly find pipe like this black pipe or galvanized pipe at big box stores in 10-foot lengths. I've heard that some big box stores will cut the pipes to length for you at no extra cost, and also thread one end of the pipes so that they'll fit into the fixture for the clamps. So you might take advantage of that if you're interested in pipe clamps. The pipe clamps tend to be the least expensive type of large clamp that you can get. This clamp is probably about 3 feet long. However, back when I was creating English garden benches, I actually had 3 or 4 clamps that were 10 feet long, and that's because I had to clamp up mortise and tenon joints in those benches that were 6 feet long. And so you can get a variety of lengths. The galvanized pipe is more likely to slip when you're using the end stops, whereas the black pipe is less likely to slip. However, it can also discolor certain types of wood, such as oak, that have high tannin counts. So you've got to make sure that the black pipe never comes into contact with your glue ups when you're using certain types of glue. Otherwise, you'll get black stains that go quite deep below the surface, and they're hard to remove. And so you'll see that on this clamp, at one point I had used some masking tape to prevent the pipe from touching the wood. So that's one way that you can get around the problem, is to use masking tape or blue tape to act as a barrier between the wood and the pipe. I don't recall how expensive these clamps were when I bought a box of 6 of them back in the early 2000s. These may have been $10 each, and the price has gone up quite a bit for the Pony brand, even though these are now made in China by a Chinese-owned company. I checked out on Amazon just recently to see what the price of these Pony pipe clamps is, and they have them listed out there for $38.99 for a 2-pack. So they're $20 each now for pipe clamps. When you consider the cost of the pipe, in addition to that $20 each for the clamps, the price adds up quickly, and so the pipe clamps may no longer be the most cost-effective method that you can use to get good quality clamps in your shop. And surprisingly, you'll often see professional woodworkers on YouTube that are still using pipe clamps, even though there's much more expensive clamps that are available out on the market. I don't use pipe clamps very frequently. However, I do still use these clamps when other types of clamps, such as parallel jaw clamps, fail to close joints, such as mortise and tenon joints, and that's due to a flaw in those parallel jaw clamps that we'll talk about in a couple minutes. And back when I was in high school, that was probably about 5 years ago or so, we had wooden jaw clamps like this. I never actually liked using these types of clamps. As a matter of fact, these clamps are frozen up. Let's see if I've got any better luck with this other larger version of the clamp. I never actually had much use for these clamps when I was in that wood shop class, because I always thought that it was inconvenient to resize how wide the clamping surface is here. And then I saw a couple YouTube videos by the Woodwright shop where he was actually spinning them just like this to quickly come down to a specific size for clamping. And then I thought, well, gee, that's awfully handy. Now, where might you use clamps like this? Well, you might use them to suspend projects up in the air. So if you had the clamp down on your table, you could then have it holding on to something like another clamp or a post or something like that that's part of your project, so that would support it while this is standing up in the air. So that would be one application for this type of a clamp. Another application that you might not think about is that on a drill press, it's a little bit risky to hold on to small parts that you're trying to drill into, because sometimes the drill bit will snag and actually start spinning the part that you're trying to hold on to. And that can be dangerous if that drill bit snags and starts spinning the project that you're trying to hold on to. And so if you put it into one of these clamps down on the table of your drill press, you can hold on to the clamp from far back, and you can get a lot of leverage to keep that board from spinning out of control. If the drill bit grabs onto the board, you can actually overpower it to keep it in place. Now, these US made clamps are no longer made in the United States. They're probably mostly made over in China now. This, I believe, was a Jorgensen brand. It's hard to see the writing on this to see. Yes, it does say that it's Jorgensen and it's made in the United States. So this is an old clamp. The Jorgensen wood clamps now are made in China. There is a company in the United States that is still manufacturing wood jaw clamps. These are by the DeBleek company. These are Micro Moose, and they work just like the old style clamps. They come in quickly to a specific size when you swing them like that, and then if you need to open up the jaw, you can do it from the back side here. And then you can go back the opposite direction to quickly get to a particular size. So once again, these are made in the United States, as you can see right here. I haven't really used this particular clamp yet. I've got a couple of these that I bought when I saw them listed out on Amazon. I have used the smaller clamp right here on the drill press to hold on to a part that was too small to hold on to with your hands, because there was that risk that the bit would grab onto it and swing it around and cause some damage. And so this worked out perfectly for that task. Also in that high school woodshop class, we had Jorgensen steel eye-bar clamps. I actually bought this clamp shortly after I graduated high school when I was doing woodworking, and I bought this from a company listed in the back of one of my magazines, and it was called Tools on Sale. It was a division of Seven Corners Ace Hardware. These at the time were made in the United States, and you can no longer buy US made steel eye-bar clamps by Jorgensen. There are other companies that produce similar style clamps, such as Bessie. I've never used Bessie's steel eye-bar clamps. These have a lot of power that gets applied at this little jaw that's steel, and so this would damage some of your woodworking projects if you're not careful, especially when you're using softwood. Certain hardwoods may not be affected by it, So what I did was I created a clamping jaw for all these steel eye-bar clamps. It looks like what you see here. And what that does is it allows me to set it onto the workbench, and then I don't have to fuss around with trying to get a clamping caul in place to protect the wood in the project. So these types of clamps have a lot of power, even more so than what the pipe clamps offer. So you may need to use these types of clamps every once in a while, even when you've got much more expensive clamps in your shop. They help to draw together joints that cannot be brought together with other style clamps. I'm sure that that wood shop in high school also had various C-style clamps, like this one from Adjustable Clamp. These are handy at times when you're trying to clamp together steel parts. If you've got to drill them out for your projects, you wouldn't use these very often on woodworking projects other than that, but they can come in handy, especially when you're trying to clamp a stop block onto a machine to set a position for a cutoff. So they're handy for that, at least. That high school wood shop may have also had an assortment of spring clamps. This is the box that I picked up when I was at Lowe's a few months ago. It currently sells for $17.28. It's got 14 different spring clamps in it that are all plastic. These are handy once in a while, depending on what kind of projects you're trying to work on. I bought 4 steel clamps that were of this style for $1 each at Lowe's, and I actually used those spring clamps when I was trying to put on new belts onto the wheels of the bandsaw. So I would use these style clamps to hold that belt in place as I worked it all the way around the wheel, both top and bottom wheel, on the bandsaw. So they're helpful for that type of a task. I don't know if I would depend too much on plastic spring clamps, but this clamp set has been effective for small tasks around the shop. And obviously they're giving you both the big clamps like this and smaller clamps in the same package. So you may find some uses for these smaller clamps, but you're probably more likely to find uses for the larger clamps. In that high school wood shop, there may have also been what are called F-style clamps. This is one example of one that actually came with the radial arm saw that I bought in the early 1990s. The person was apparently trying to get out of woodworking. It must be that they got scared by the radial arm saw and they were getting rid of all their woodworking equipment. And they threw in this in the deal. Now this has metal jaws on it, and so once again you've got to protect your wood by sticking a scrap board into here and into here when you're doing a glue up using this style of clamp. Now this is an early Jorgensen clamp that was made in the United States, as it shows right there. Jorgensen is now owned by a Chinese company, as I mentioned before. And this is what their newer style clamp looks like. It has plastic pads on each of the jaws. And one of the problems that I found is that these plastic pads will sometimes slide off and get lost wherever you're storing the clamps. And so you've got to be a little bit careful about that to make sure that these don't get lost, because then your project could get damaged as you're clamping up whatever needs to be clamped for a glue up. These clamps I bought sometimes in a 4-pack on Amazon, and at other times I bought them in a package with 6-inch clamps. So these may come together like this, and when they do come together like that, they put a large handle on both the 12-inch clamp and the 6-inch clamp. When you buy a 4-pack of the clamps, however, they put a smaller handle on the clamps, so that may make it a little bit more fatiguing for you to use these smaller handles than a larger handle. I don't have any problem with it, but some people who have trouble grasping small things due to arthritis may struggle a little bit with these smaller handles. So the 4-pack of this style of clamp right now is $39.99 at Amazon. You'll occasionally find it at $5 off or even $10 off that price on Amazon or other sites. So you've got to pay attention not only to the type of clamp that you want and the brand of clamp that you want, but you've also got to take into consideration the time of the year and whether or not Lowe's or Amazon is selling the clamps at a discount. The Woodworking wooden clamps here are currently on Amazon for $29.99. That's for the smaller 8-inch size. The 12-inch size is listed as no longer being available on Amazon, but I'm sure that you can get it from other sources. I don't recall what this one originally cost. It may have been $39.99 when I bought it. I've got a couple of these. Moving up the price scale, you'll often see on YouTube videos people using something called a parallel jaw clamp. This is an example of one. This is made by Jorgensen. As you can see right here, these clamp jaws are not truly parallel right now. When you apply pressure to them, however, this jaw will actually spring backward a little bit, and then the jaws are supposed to be absolutely parallel once the clamping pressure has been applied to it. I found that there are some issues with some of these clamps. I've got a 24-inch clamp like this that'll refuse to actually clamp down tight. And then I've also got a 5-foot clamp that has that same problem. So I've got to be a little bit careful how I use these in some cases. And if I find that I can no longer turn this handle and yet the clamp still is not tight, then I've got to pull that clamp out and put in another clamp in its place, potentially a pipe clamp or my steel eye-bar clamp. Okay, of the steel eye-bar clamps, I own 4 that are 4 feet long, 4 that are 5 feet long, and 4 that are 6 feet long. I happened to pick up the 6-foot long clamps at an auction. I believe that I paid right around $100 for all 4 of those. The other clamps I had purchased from Tools on Sale that I mentioned previously, and those were quite expensive at that time. I believe that the 5-foot clamps were $60 each. The 4-foot clamps may have been $45 or $50. I don't recall exactly. These parallel jaw clamps, however, have a little bit of an issue in that not only do you have problems where sometimes they won't apply pressure when you turn the handle, but also if you're trying to work vertically like this, the clamps won't hold their position. They'll slide down and slam into the non-moving jaw. I understand that Jorgensen has come out with a new version of these Cabinet Master clamps that looks very similar to probably about a half dozen other brands of clamps. And now I'm thinking that maybe another company is actually manufacturing those, and then the Jorgensen name is getting applied onto them. Those other redesigned clamps do not have this problem where the jaw will drop down. Instead, they've got teeth that are located out on the bar here that hold the jaw in place so that it does not slide down when you're trying to work vertically. I don't know of any other differences between the clamps. You may need to evaluate whether or not you want the older style clamps, which are still being sold, or the newer style. I own over 50 of these Jorgensen Cabinet Master clamps in different sizes ranging from 2 feet long all the way up to 6 feet long, like this one that I've got here. I've spent a small fortune on these clamps, and they're usually quite useful. However, there's probably limited applications where you'll be using a 6-foot long clamp. And so you've got to buy carefully and watch for these to go on sale. Don't just go into the store and pick up all the clamps that you're interested in, because you may find that that store does not have the best deal on a particular size of the clamp. For instance, right now, Lowe's is apparently running a sale on the 24-inch clamps like this one. It's $29.98 for this clamp, whereas Amazon has a 2-pack of these clamps listed for $67.99. So it's about $8 more for a 2-pack from Amazon than it would be from Lowe's. Now these deals are more than likely going to change, and you may find that Amazon comes out with better deals around their prime time deals days and possibly also the day after Thanksgiving. Right now at Lowe's, they've got a 48-inch clamp of this style listed for $39.98. Out on Amazon, a 2-pack of those 48-inch clamps had been over $120. Right now they're listed at $84.55. So a 2-pack of the 4-foot long clamps right now is about $5 more than it is at Lowe's. Right now a 30-inch clamp, which is a little bit longer than this clamp, is listed at $51.98 at Lowe's. That clamp is not on sale at Lowe's right now. While at Amazon, a 2-pack of 30-inch clamps is listed at $76.49. So it's about $25 cheaper if you're buying a 2-pack to buy it through Amazon. Those prices will change quite frequently, and so if you're interested in parallel jaw clamps, keep an eye on the prices and whether or not there's an expiration date associated with the prices. So if you think that you're going to need clamps, look and see if you can find them on sale. I know that Harbor Freight has some clamps that look similar to this. They may not be as strong as these Jorgensen clamps, and in some cases they're actually more expensive than the Jorgensen clamps when you can find the Jorgensen clamps on sale either at Lowe's or at Amazon. Next up are fast-acting clamps, like these Irwin squeeze clamps. I picked up these at a woodworking auction a while ago. I've got a variety of sizes that I bought, including this very small one, a mid-sized one, and a large one. I actually purchased multiples of each size, and I have not yet used these despite buying these almost 2 years ago now. These, I'm sure, are quite handy for different purposes. I'm not exactly sure why you would use a small clamp like this. Maybe you want to clamp your finger or something like that, but it's going to take a while to get up there. And now you can have it holding on to your finger. But I'm sure that you could probably use that for some tasks for woodworking. The larger clamps might be handy for clamping on a stop block or something like that onto a fence when you only have one hand available, but it does take quite a while to get to the other end. And so you may want to release it, get close, and then you can squeeze the handle to bring in the jaw, and then it'll hold. Now the holding power of this style of clamp is much less than one of those F-style clamps that I showed to you earlier, and so this may or may not be effective for you. These quick grip clamps were made in the United States originally. Right now I believe that these are also made over in China, so you may or may not like that, whether or not you buy this quick grip brand or a DeWalt brand or something like that. Another type of clamp that you might buy is a band clamp. I don't have any examples of those in the shop here. I had one or two of them in the early 1990s, but they've seemed to have disappeared. They're handy for clamping up miter joints. If you can buy some that have the protector so that they don't smash the corner while you're doing the clamping. At one time I also had an aluminum 4-corner clamp for doing miters. It was another light duty clamp, not terribly useful, but it might be handy for clamping up miter joints if you're doing picture frames and things of that sort. Back in the 1980s, I actually bought some Stanley brand clamps that are used for clamping up miter joints. These are made of aluminum. I checked out on Amazon. They no longer make clamps that look exactly like this, but they do have some that are orange colored that they sell for $25 each. These may or may not be useful for you because they are kind of hard to use for clamping up miter joints because of the way they work. So you'd put one board into here, another board into here, and then hope that as you're clamping it down, the miter joint does not shift. Yeah, I talked about using the quick grip clamps. Microjig makes another similar clamp that works with their match fit system. I really like this style of clamp because every time you squeeze the trigger, it moves this jaw down quite a distance. And while these look like plastic toys, they actually have quite a bit of holding power. I've used these style of clamps in various fixtures on my horizontal pantograph. This is one of those fixtures, and here you can just insert the jaw from the back side, rotate it around, and then you can clamp a board onto the fixture. And that's worked out very effectively. And as I said, every time you squeeze the trigger, it moves the jaw quite a distance compared with the quick grip clamps. And so you can quickly apply a lot of pressure to hold the board in place on the other side of the fixture. You've also seen me use this style of clamp on other types of fixtures that I've created for the table saw. So for instance, this is my tenoning jig that I created. These style clamps will slide right through the dovetails that are cut into the board, and then you can clamp a board down to the surface just that easily. Microjig also sells other types of dovetail hardware that'll fit into the slots here so that you can add in fences quite easily, like this fence and the fence that's back here. So that's a handy use for these types of clamps. And I also use that style clamp when I was building this jig for the table saw just recently for doing tapering on the table saw. You can also use this for straight line ripping short boards, and with these clamps they just fit right into the slot and they're easy to remove, and they slide into the slots that are dovetails, and they're 14-degree dovetails, which is a common dovetail size, and they just fit in just that easily. Microjig also produces other types of hardware that'll fit into these slots. These are designed for CNC work, typically, although I use these on my vertical pantograph to hold boards in place. These will just slide down, and then you can lock this down, and as you rotate this, it turns this cam, which is a different size as it spins around, so it locks the project into place, as you can see there. They also sell another style that looks like this, that works the same way. Here you can see the dovetail key that's on the back side, and you can slide that right into the slot, and with any luck you can get it to go in, and then you move it down to where we want to locate it, lock down the one piece, and then you'd have your board down in this area here, and as you tighten this clamp, it slides down this rail, further locking in the piece that you're trying to clamp in place. So that may be some handy hardware for you if you're trying to do certain types of tasks and you can't figure out how to clamp something in place otherwise. This type of clamp is still held in place even though this is loose, and that's because you got to push this in to release it. And now it's getting hung up for some reason up there and it's not coming out. But anyway, that works out pretty well. A 2-pack of these squeeze clamps from Microjig listed out on Amazon right now for $39.99, and you may find that they'll go on sale once in a while, especially around Prime Day events. There will often be a discount on these types of clamps. Another thing that you might find out on Amazon is a full set that looks like this. They give you 2 screw type clamps in the kit, along with dovetail bits and a clearancing bit and a setup block. You may have seen me use these components once in a while. I almost never use these screw clamps because I don't find that they're very effective for my uses, but they might be okay for your uses. They just seem like they're a little bit too slow for my needs. I like the squeeze clamp style better. This set was right around $116 when I checked on Amazon just recently. Another type of clamp that you might find are Milescraft 4009 fence clamps. These are currently $13.99, I believe, for a pair of them out on Amazon. But what these will allow you to do is to create a zero clearance fence for your rip fence on your table saw, and you can hold it in place with this clamp. Now this seems like this would be really handy, and I have found that it is quite handy. However, they didn't use the more aggressive Acme threads on here. Instead, these are standard threads that you would see on a bolt, and so it takes a long time to screw this down in place to get it to be one size or another size. And you may find that that's frustrating, especially when you take your zero clearance fence off the rip fence and you want to keep the clamp held in place so that you don't lose it, and so that it's permanently attached to this fence board. And so now there you can see that I finally got it so that it's going to hold it down. And so these are very cheaply produced clamps. They do seem to work for me, and you may find that they're useful for you also, or you may find that these are just too flimsy and too inflexible. There's probably other clamps out there on the market where they do use Acme style threads, like you see on pipe clamps and steel eyebar clamps, that take fewer turns to get this to move into position. And if you're working with pocket holes, you may use a clamp like this Wen clamp. This sells for $18.22. This allows you to secure boards that have pocket holes that do not yet have screws in them together. And so as you clamp this down, you'd put this into one of the holes that you cut out for a pocket hole screw, and this other face goes onto the mating board. I bought these clamps probably 2 years ago, and since I almost never use pocket hole screws, I've never actually used this clamp, so I don't know how effective it is. But I thought that it would be handy to have just in case I need to do a couple pocket hole screws. Speaking of pocket holes, probably about 22 years ago, I bought a Kreg K2000 Pro Pack, which came with a face frame clamp that looks like this, that you use to hold two boards together to keep them from sliding around while you're putting in the pocket hole screws. Now this is an effective clamp. It looks like it has the vice grip branding on it, and so this was at one point made by Vice Grip. I'm sure that Kreg is now making it in-house, or they're outsourcing it to a company in China. But this style of clamp is also quite effective for specific needs. And a couple years ago I saw a couple YouTubers mentioning PowerTech toggle clamps, where you can get a 4-pack of these clamps for $18.99 on Amazon. These would be used on a fixture to hold boards in place. They've got a handle here that you can swing to hold the board down. I haven't really found a good use for these yet. I found that the other style clamps that I have that'll fit in dovetails work much more effectively for my uses than would toggle clamps like this. And so this was not a good deal for me, but it may be for your purposes if you don't want to go through the expense of buying a dovetail clamping solution. If you've got to clamp up projects such as cabinets, Woodpeckers makes a clamping square set that looks like you see here. This has the larger Acme style thread, so if you turn this, it advances rather rapidly. So that's one of the advantages of this style, and also this is less likely to move out of place. I've used these successfully for clamping up several different cabinets, such as the cabinet for my table saw and also the table for my horizontal pantograph, and these worked out really well. As a matter of fact, I like these so much that at $2.99 I decided that I didn't want to buy another set of 4 of these, and so what I did instead is I bought something on Amazon where the reviews claimed that it was just as good as the Woodpeckers version. And this is what came in the box. These small clamps, like you see here, with small hardware with non-Acme threads. And so you turn this, and you got to turn it a bunch of times because this is just a standard thread style that you would see on a bolt. And so this will go down inside the holes, just like you see here. just like on the woodpecker's version. And yet, you see, if you compare the two side by side, these really are not that much alike. The woodpecker's version is very easy to use. It's not likely to slide out of position. And some of these models, according to the reviews, are not actually square when they come out of the box. I checked this one and it does appear to be square. The woodpecker's one is dead on square. And I've used this to actually square up some other types of projects, like a shelf that would go on to the top of this. I can hold that shelf in place with a clamp like this while I'm securing the board otherwise in place to the assembly. So that's been extremely helpful, whereas this cheaper brand, DIY Log, which costs $45.97 for a 4-pack, this set I've never actually used. I bought 2 of these sets that I could use in case I've got all 4 of these clamps in use and I still need to clamp up some other components in the project. I can use this other smaller clamp in place of that. As I said, I've never actually used these in a project, and according to some of the reviews that I saw on YouTube, these would be rather frustrating to use because they have standard threads instead of Acme style threads, and also these will slide around quite a bit while the woodpecker's version does not. It tends to stay in place. Next up, I had to install some long drawer slides. So I did the obvious thing and I found a Craig jig for setting up those drawer slides, and this piece of garbage was so bad that I could never actually count on it to actually set the drawer slide in place accurately. It was always off by 3/16 of an inch on the one end or more. And I was trying to secure it in place with one of these Automax clamps from Craig. This is a 6-inch long version. This currently sells for $44.99 on Amazon. I found that this was rather frustrating to use with this jig because there's very little clamping surface here that you can actually use. They've got this goofy grid in here, and also this Craig logo that you can't clamp onto. And I had to back this up with an F-style clamp to try to hold this thing in place, and it still slid. So every one of those drawer slides that I tried to put in place with this jig, I had to reset using other means such as a tape measure. So this jig was the most frustrating Craig tool I've ever purchased, and since I bought this, I've never bought another Craig tool. I was that frustrated with it. The Automax clamp is handy at times because it has a 6-inch reach that if you're trying to do a glue up and you've got 2 boards that are side by side and you need to reach in up to 6 inches to hold those 2 boards together so that you don't have alignment problems, this style of clamp works out great for that. But you do need to make sure that you've got it adjusted correctly so that it's applying the correct amount of pressure down here. It is supposed to automatically adjust, but sometimes you've got to fuss around with adjustment on the clamp, which is right here, to get it to work the way you expect it to work. So right there, it's not allowing me to clamp it down, and that's because I've got the clamp upside down. So if I turn it around, let's see if I'm able to clamp it down now. Now it clamps down too easily, and there's a gap there, so that didn't work out real well. Anyway, it's supposed to work well. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Next up is the Tay Tools 388091 Quick Adjust Vertical Workbench Surface Hold-On Clamp. You've seen me use these in several different videos with the dog holes that are in this workbench. You can just put this down into one of the dog holes, put your board down onto the surface here, and then just tighten it, and it holds it in place. I don't have one of the classic hold fasts that would be used with these dog holes that you can set into position just simply by striking it with a wooden mallet or something like that. So I've used these clamps quite effectively. And I bought two packs, and unfortunately one of the 4 clamps was defective. The black piece that's supposed to go into the bottom there, the set screw that's supposed to be in it, doesn't actually hold it in place. So I can only use 3 of the 4 clamps. Once again, these are bought from Tay Tools or Taylor Tool Works, and they do work effectively, other than only 3 of the 4 clamps work. Another clamp that I bought from Tay Tools is an adjustable workbench bench dog screw clamp that sits down inside your bench dog holes, and then you can use it to secure a board in place, pushing it up against one of your other bench dogs that you've got into another bench dog hole. It looks like this would be a quite useful tool. I've never actually used these, even though it has a low profile, which could be handy when you're trying to do planing using a hand plane, because this would be down below a 3/4 inch thick board, and so that could be handy to hold that board in place so that you can do hand planing or other types of operations. I may have to pull this out of the box and actually start using it once in a while. While I was at another auction, I found an interesting looking clamp that I'd never seen before. This is produced by Betsy. As you can see here, it has 2 legs on this one end, and then it has a screw jaw on the other end. I thought, well, gee, that's kind of a handy looking clamp. I've got to get that. Well, I can get it at a severe discount at an auction. So I actually bought 3 of these clamps. I tried to use one once, and I couldn't quite figure out how to make it work effectively for that use. But I'm sure that it is quite helpful from time to time. So once again, this is an interesting style of clamp. It's supposed to put minimal pressure on the boards that you're trying to clamp on this end, because the pressure is actually split between these 2 legs. I had a bit of difficulty trying to find the model number of this. It has listed on the bar a model number of GSCC 3.512. I did quite a bit of Googling, and I eventually found that this is a Betsy DH-BC-12 clamp. It sells for about $29.47 on Amazon right now, and so you may find a use for one of these clamps, and if you do, drop a note into the comments of this video and let me know what you'd use it for. Finally, my horizontal pantograph that I've got, which is commercially produced, came with ratchet clamps that look like this. And essentially you set the board down here, bring this down into place, and then you can ratchet this back to secure the board in place. That's handy for one direction of clamping, but not in the other direction, because you can't turn this clamp on the table because it has a tongue that goes in only one direction. Well, the company that makes that unit also sells an optional style clamp. This costs a little bit more than an arm and a leg. I've got 2 of these, and this will allow you to set it onto the table, and then once it's on the table in the slots, you can actually spin the entire unit around so you can clamp in any direction, and then it works the same way. You just bring it down, and then you can ratchet it to hold the board in place. I didn't really talk too much about which clamps are my favorite clamps, and part of the reason for that is because the types of projects that I build in my shop are probably different from the types of projects that you'll build in your shop. You may find that a wide variety of F-style clamps are perfectly suited for your needs, along with a handful of pipe clamps, potentially up to 10 feet long. In other cases, you may find that you'll want to have much more expensive styles of clamps, such as these steel eye-bar clamps or parallel jaw clamps, if you're working more on cabinets or something like that. And you may also find that if you're working on cabinets, you'd be able to take advantage of these woodpecker's clamps, which are quite expensive. However, they are extremely handy to use when you're trying to clamp up certain types of projects. And you can also get into the specialty clamps. You may find that a clamp like this would be handy for you once or twice a year. And if you've got bench dog holes in your workbench, you may find a clamp that's like this would be helpful. They also have other clamps that look similar to this clamp that'll fit down into bench dog holes. However, this clamp is not able to turn the corner because my top is just a little bit too tall it's 1.25 inches thick, whereas this type of clamp may require a 3/4 inch thick top to be able to slide down into the dog hole and then turn to lock into place. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.